This is a topic that was elicited by Elden Ring's DLC Shadow of the Erdtree. I enjoyed the expansion a whole lot because it gave me more of what I value about FromSoft games the most, and that's the exploration of genuinely dangerous and mysterious world, discovering new enemies, weapons, armor, spells, abilities, what have you. There was one aspect of the game that I struggled to enjoy, however, and I had to figure out why that is. Talking about the boss encounters. My first boss of the game was Relana. It was a sharp reminder of what the game is about, that is, beating your ass and teaching you humility. A lot of people agree that using magic is easy mode, and from what I have seen online, not many people point out that shields are journalist mode. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not about to preach about how to play the game correctly or anything like that. I am just building up to what I was using. I was not using magic or shields, so my only defensive option was dodging and the new flask that allows you to perfect block, in my case with my two-handed Darkmoon Greatsword. Learning the patterns of the boss is therefore crucial to success. And I had a bad time, which made me stop and think, what is different about this DLC? Because the base game was challenging, but I rarely felt like I'm not enjoying learning the bosses. Though it did happen. The ulcerated tree, for example, can go eat a suck. Something felt different with Relana, but at the point, I chalked it up to me just being super rusty and not having played the game for a long time. I was used to faster games with different pacing and different offensive and defensive tools, so I didn't think too much about it, except that I suck. After fighting a few more bosses, such as the Lion and Mesmer, I started to piece together the problem I was having. The bosses feel much less interactive and are much harder to read than the bosses in the base game or previous FromSoft work. I'm not the only one who noticed or described the problem in a similar way. From my experience, it was a brutal struggle to learn every new boss and an exercise in frustration. At the same time, I do recognize that my mentality was not always where it probably should have been. I was too focused on getting through it instead of enjoying the process of learning. I suspect the reason for that was the fact that I did not enjoy the design of these boss encounters. My only way to interact with the boss was to dodge the patterns and punish when the boss deems to have the most minuscule window of recovery. Nearly every fight starts with the boss neutral skipping right into your butthole. There's almost no spacing whatsoever, which is something From games have always emphasized, and the aggression is near ceaseless. And that's before factoring in poor camera, full screen, full arena effects that occlude what the boss is even doing, some bosses being huge, and impossible to discern what they are up to if you're too close, which you will be because there is no spacing. And finally, the classic FromSoft jank that is present in pretty much every single game. Examples would be boss realigning, height level differences, attacks being cancelled due to some geometry interference, etc., etc. My struggle is partly self-inflicted, which I will freely admit. There are other ways to build your character, and you can, for example, delete a boss using a very specific setup of buffs and specific magic, but I see this as a cool bonus if you understand the game enough and have gathered the required tools, not something to be considered optimal gameplay. And even with variety of builds, it boils down to avoiding the attacks that are hugely oppressive and then chip at the massive health bar. Mistakes are punished mortally, which means progging the fight takes a long time because you can't even really see what the boss's kit is, and it takes a long time to experiment with timings and different approaches. Can I jump that? Do I have to dodge in or out? How long is this goo on the ground active? What does it even do? And so on. There are also some telegraphs and attacks that are just straight silly or nonsensical, so that also plays a role in intuitively learning a fight. At the same time, many of these are somewhat acceptable because you are fighting eldritch demons and undead abominations that mutated into something even more diabolical and inhuman, so it's understandable that they behave in a way that is hard to understand. But it's an interesting sentence there. This is a bit of a give and take, and I appreciate the cosmic horror fantasy, but it has its downsides in terms of gameplay. Erdtree made me realize that the combat systems I enjoy the most are the ones that have more interactivity baked in. Neo has Ki, which you can deplete for the enemies or run out of yourself. Wolong has the Spirit Bar, which affects you and the enemy in the same way, resulting in a dynamic tug of war. Stranger of Paradise has a Soul Charge, which limits your powerful defensive tools. Stellar Blade has balance points on enemies and a parry that works on a gradient, allowing skillful play and not fatally punishing slight timing mistakes. All these games offer many ways of decision making and risk versus reward assessment. In Valkyrie Elysium, if you know a projectile is coming, you can outrun it, dodge it, you can block it, or you can try to parry and deflect it. This is a fun decision to make and rewarding action to learn. Having options to deal with incoming aggression is the key here, I think. If all I have is a dodge, then it's kinda uninteresting. And I did not have this problem with the base game of Elden Ring, where I felt like even though I had those same tools and arguably fewer of them because in the base game I dual-wielded katanas, so I couldn't even block at all. I still had great fun and learning encounters was rewarding. In Erdtree, you have to respect the bosses completely, whereas in the base game, I suppose you could assert yourself a bit more and the aggression from bosses wasn't as oppressive, and spacing was much more of a factor. I really dislike the constant neutral skips and long attack strings of Erdtree bosses that keep moving them towards you with very strong tracking. There is a lack of decision making, there is a lack of risk versus reward, and that is what makes the bosses feel one-dimensional, in my opinion. One interesting comparison to make is also Sekiro. I think everyone agrees that the thing that makes Sekiro different is that there is a set playstyle that you must learn. You can't make a build like in a Souls game. You gotta parry, and you gotta learn every boss. You can use different active skills and different prosthetics, but it's not going to alter your gameplay in a massive way. But Sekiro is very interactive with the bosses. Parry is not your only defensive option. You can jump, you can run, you can dodge, you have Mikkiri counter, there is the umbrella prosthetic as well. You can also interrupt some enemies with firecrackers. It is not purely one-sided conversation that you are having with the boss. I remember seeing some people even finish the game without using the parry at all. I guess that's because you can either fill up the posture damage, or you can deal direct damage to the life bar. These are the things that make the game interactive and you have decisions to make, despite the lack of RPG building that Souls games have. So you could say Sekiro has decision making in the battle, and Souls games have decision making before the battle. I like to have both, and that is why I love Team Ninja games. What I'm talking about here is not objective truth. This is how I see the combat in all of these amazing games that I love. I love some more than the others, but they are all pretty good games. If you think I'm dead wrong or you see things differently, let me know in the comments. I'm really curious what your experience with action games is. And maybe your taste in action games and what you want them to be doing has changed over the years. Have you ever thought about that? Anyway, that's about it for this video. Thanks for listening, and whatever boss you are dealing with next, try to enjoy the process and don't get hung up on beating it fast.